Tonight, we're diving into a case before the U.S. Supreme Court that could have major implications for workplace discrimination lawsuits. The case, Ames versus Ohio Department of Youth Services, involves a straight woman, quote unquote, who claims she was passed over for a promotion and later demoted because of her sexual orientation. The justices seem to be leaning in her favor, questioning whether the legal standard for proving discrimination should be different for majority and minority groups. This case is unfolding as major corporations and government agencies face growing legal challenges to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, many sparked by last year's Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. So what does this mean for workplace protections? And could this ruling shift how discrimination is handled in the courts? To break it all down, we're joined by Elie Mystal, Justice Correspondent for The Nation. Elie, I'm a great fan of your work, and I really want to thank you for being here. So for those who may not fully be aware, can we start with the bigger picture? How significant is this case, and what impact could it have on future discrimination lawsuits?
Okay, so I'm going to kind of answer the question two ways. It's very significant, but I actually don't think it will have a huge impact on the future of anti-discrimination lawsuits, at least if the case kind of stays the way that it seems to be going from the Supreme Court. So that's a little bit complicated. So let me start with the actual lawsuit, all right? Marlene Ames is a straight white woman who claims that she was passed over for promotion when they hired a gay person for the job. And that's it. That's her entire evidence. No pattern or practice or history of racial or sexual discrimination, no larger background issues. It was just she wanted the job and they gave it to a gay person. So clearly she was looked over because of her heterosexuality. If white fragility could be a Supreme Court case, this is what that case would look like, right? Now, everybody out here knows you can't bring no discrimination lawsuit if all you got is that they promoted a white man ahead of you, right? No black person can do that. If we could, we'd have a lawsuit every Tuesday, right? So we understand that you need to bring more evidence than just they hired some other person that doesn't look like you for the job, or else, again, discrimination lawsuits would be all over the place, right? So now Ohio is a very special state in terms of it's how federal law applies there. It's one of the only states, there are like a couple of them, that have this very archaic rule, judicial rule for civil rights complaints. Now, obviously, anybody, white, black, brown, green, whatever, can sue for racial or sexual discrimination. But in Ohio and a couple of other states, if you are a member of the majority, which usually means white, in this case means straight, you have to show a background pattern or practice, right? You have a heightened standard of proof to bring a racial discrimination case, right? This makes sense if you think about it, right? If I'm black and I'm suing for racial discrimination, I shouldn't have to prove that racism exists, right? Like we can skip the remedial white history part of the class and just go straight to my individual complaint, right? But if you're white, since, this country does not historically discriminate against you, since this country does not historically discriminate against straight people, then you kind of have to prove that there is something else in the history of your organization or institution that points towards discriminatory behavior before you can bring a civil rights case, right? Now that, again, Ohio is one of the very few states that has it. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which controls federal law, and Ohio is one of the few circuits that still allows for this kind of heightened standard. And so at the Supreme Court, the main thrust of the argument was, well, let's just get rid of that rule. We already don't have that rule in New York. We already don't have that rule in Florida. Let's get rid of that rule, and then everybody can sue for racial discrimination without having to meet a higher burden, which is, the white people can sue under the same burden as black people. And as I already said, this woman most likely cannot prove a racial discrimination case or a sexual orientation discrimination case based on the evidence that she has, because all she's got is they hired a gay person. So what? That's not normally enough under any standard, much less this heightened standard, right? So in terms of significance, that's what I'm saying, maybe not so much, because just letting white people sue under the same rubric that white people can in Ohio, that white people can sue in Florida, doesn't change the landscape too much. What could change the landscape is that there was this other kind of argument just underneath the top level Supreme Court back and forth. And that's this argument that was put forward by Stephen Miller and his America First legal team, that says that any opportunity, any way that any corporation or institution that has a DEI program is de facto discriminatory, facially discriminatory against white folks, right? So think about how that would change the standard, man. It would change the standard so that now white folks, instead of having to have a heightened standard to prove discrimination, they have no standard at all. They don't have to prove discrimination one bit. They can just say, hey, they have a DEI program and they hired a gay person. So now guess what? I was discriminated against, right? Like that is the argument Stephen Miller wanted the court to adopt. Now, as I listened to the case, I didn't hear 5 votes for that. Neil Gorsuch was kind of interested, but for the most part, I don't think that they got 5 votes for that more radical argument. So my thought is that this case will actually come down 9-0 with even the liberal justices, even, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor and Elena Kagan joining the conservatives to get rid of this one rule, but protecting but rejecting the larger argument that Stephen Miller was trying to make that was hyper-focused on DEI as facially discriminatory against whites. So I think it's going to be a bad ruling, but when you see a bad ruling that's 9-0, it's always important to think, well, what were the liberals actually trying to avoid? Because usually what they were trying to avoid is something much, much worse. And I think that's what's going to happen here. At least I still have hope that is what's going to happen here.
So this is kind of triggering, Michigan, the University of Michigan, affirmative action, lawsuits back in the day. My concern is that with something like this, even with, this 9-0 decision, we live in this country right now where everybody's talking about Trump and Republican mandates, that so many people across the country will feel like emboldened to go against anything they see as discriminatory, even if, like with this case, there's no real basis. And they'll cite a 9-0 Supreme Court decision, even though what they actually might be deciding on is not exactly what they would be trying to sue on. Is that accurate?
Oh, you're exactly right. The lawsuits are coming. And like I said, if white fragility was a Supreme Court case, this is exactly how it looks like. The lawsuits are coming, and anybody white who ever has to suffer the ignominy of seeing a black person get a job that they think that they are entitled to, that white person is going to feel emboldened to sue. And it's going to come at any black person who gets a job, any LGBTQ person who gets a job. Like, those lawsuits are coming, and there might be Supreme Court cases down the road that do adopt Stephen Miller's argument and do de facto facially rule that any DEI program is a violation of the Civil Rights Act. So those lawsuits are absolutely coming. They wrote it down in Project 2025. Like, they literally said that they want to flood the zone with these kinds of lawsuits. It's going to be incredibly bad going forward in terms of trying to just defend the fact that you have a job while black, because white folks in this country are going to argue that there is no job that a white person couldn't do better. That's the crux of their argument. So absolutely, these lawsuits are coming, and it's going to happen increasingly as long as we continue to allow Trump and Musk and Republicans to control the White House and Congress and the Supreme Court. That's the sad reality that we're all living in.
And as we're talking about this reality, what are you seeing from your broad experience right now as it relates to basically how they're ending DEI in other spaces, but at the same time, basically asking for DEI for themselves? How are you seeing this play out on the colleges, in corporate spaces, and nonprofit organizations? What is the bigger picture that people should be paying attention to as this is happening?
Well, remember, no lawyer that I am talking to right now is truly fighting for DEI. DEI is a policy invented by white people to comply with the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Acts and their guarantees of equal protection under the law and equal employment opportunity for all, right? Black people are not asking for DEI. Black people are asking to be treated fairly when we apply for jobs. And it's white folks who are just like, oh, I can't do that. If you leave it up to me, I'm always going to hire Chip, right? Like, white people who could not figure out how to hire people on, wait for it, merit, instead of hiring the most meritorious person for jobs would consistently hire the whitest person for jobs. White people invented DEI to force themselves to hire black people who deserve to have a job, who deserve to have an opportunity, right? So now as white organizations and white companies and white government is trying to take DEI away, I'm not fighting for DEI. What I'm fighting for is the Civil Rights Act. My mother did not march for DEI. She marched for the Civil Rights Act. And so my question is always, well, if you're going to take away DEI, how are you going to still comply with the Civil Rights Act? How are you going to promise and prove that you are hiring people based on merit as opposed to based on whiteness? Because every time you take away DEI, what looks like happens is that you only hire people based on their whiteness. So how are you going to solve that? And that is the larger issue here. These organizations and companies that are trying to take away DEI, they're not saying we're going to hire the most meritorious person for these jobs. They're saying we're going to hire white people for these jobs. They're saying that we never really wanted to hire black people in the first place, and so now we can just fire them. Look at what's happening in the federal government. People who happen to be black, who did not get their jobs through a DEI program or anything like that, who have literal years of experience and expertise in their government jobs, are being fired simply because they were black while having the job. The person that I keep trying to remind people of right now is this woman named Gwen Wilcox, who was a commissioner for the National Labor Relations Board, is exceptionally credentialed, has a long professional work history, and she was fired for the crime of being black while in government. There's no anti-DEI argument to support firing Gwen Wilcox. If you want to fire people, you have to look at their record. You have to show some kind of cause. Gwen Wilcox was just a great commissioner for the NLRB. She was fired because she was black. And that is happening throughout government. That is happening throughout corporate America right now. And that is what I'm fighting against. That's what most lawyers are fighting against, not the government's ability to end a white program that they invented and they called it diversity, inclusion, and investment initiatives. We're talking about following the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
No, absolutely. And I want to bring in my panel to get some of their thoughts and questions as well. I want to bring in Raven Schwam-Curtis, content creator and keynote speaker out of Chicago, Illinois. And I want to bring in Michael Imhotep, the host of the African History Network show out of Detroit. Raven, your question.
Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Raven Schwam-Curtis. I'm a content creator and keynote speaker. I think DEI at its core is a modality that is supposed to right a wrong, right? The wrong being the long history of enslavement, the afterlife of slavery in this country, and the violence of indigenous genocide and all of the other violent moments of erasure and subjugation of communities on the margins. And so to see the right weaponize this term in such a virulent way, such that we're even afraid to name it or associate with it or even hold the value of this modality that in its essence is designed, although imperfectly, to serve us, to right these historical wrongs, I think is deeply troubling. And I will continue to fight for something like DEI to exist because we need some modality, even if we don't call it DEI anymore, to rectify what has been wronged.
And I always try to remind people, DEI was invented not just to help black folks, not just to help, descendants of slavery. I can go back to, my some deep ancestor that I had, was liberated when Sherman marched through the South, right? So I can go all the way back there, but DEI isn't there just to help me. The biggest beneficiaries of DEI in this country are white women. Straight up.
Yes, sir.
White women benefited the most from inclusion opportunities. Remember, now we're calling it DEIA because we're also talking about people who are disabled, who are getting opportunities to participate in the workforce, like hearing impaired people and handicapped people. Why are we firing them? Why is somebody getting fired who, again, does their job well simply because they were hired under a program that gives opportunity to people who are hearing impaired or people who are blind? Why are we firing them, Elon? And of course, they never have an answer for that. They never have a reason for why the disabled American has to be fired or the white woman has to be fired. It's super focused on whenever they talk about who they're firing, they're always talking about us. And that is meant to encourage the, mouth-breathing white supremacist Trump voters to be like, yeah, well, you're getting rid of those Negroes and I like that. Oh, wait, how did I lose my job? I thought my job was, I thought the leopards wouldn't eat my face is what they're saying now. Right. But but that's the whole problem with their approach to this. They're not doing these firings on an individualized case by case basis. They're just taking a wrecking ball through the whole federal government and focusing it on Black and brown people.
Michael, your question.
Hey, Elie, good to see you again. So can you talk about how this case lines up with Project 2025, okay? Because when you read Project 2025, we know it talks about attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also we see it deals with going after discrimination cases against white people. We know there was a federal judge, a Trump-appointed judge, who ruled that the Minority Business Development Agency had to service white people. We know that we see the revoking of the affirmative action executive order from President Johnson when Trump first came into office the second time. So can you talk about that? And how does that line up with this Title VII argument that this white woman is making from the 1964 Civil Rights Act, when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was largely for African Americans?
The deepest desire of Stephen Miller, as was written down in Project 2025, is to put every corporation in America on notice that if they hire Black folks, they could be sued for violating civil rights. Doesn't matter how qualified the Black person is. Doesn't matter how many, letters of recommendation they have. Doesn't matter how well the Black person does their job. The point of Project 2025 is to create an environment where anytime you hire a Black person, you have to potentially defend that hiring in court. All right. And now some might be able to defend themselves and some might not. But the point is that if you know anything about corporate America, they don't want to get sued every dang day just because they hired somebody. So with Project 25 and with Stephen Miller's America First legal team, the idea here is to make it so that it is safer for every corporation from Target all the way down to your local mom and pop sandwich store. It's safer to hire a white person than to risk hiring a Black person or a Latino person. Because if you hire one of those people of color, you might get sued. And do you really want to lawyer up? Is this, employee, is this middle manager that you're hiring at your plant in Detroit, is it really worth catching a full-on lawsuit over? That's the calculation they want corporations to make. They don't want to have to sue every corporation. They want corporations to self-censor and to chill and to self-decide that they will not hire Black folks because it's just too dangerous to do so. Like that is the 30,000-foot point that they are making, and they're incredibly close to succeeding. And we've already seen them succeed at the college admissions level in the aftermath of SFFA v. Harvard, the affirmative action decision. Right? We've seen Black enrollment plummet at some of these elite institutions, so-called elite institutions. Right? And it's because these institutions are now afraid of admitting Black and brown students who are meritorious, who do deserve to be there, who can compete in that intellectual environment. Universities are afraid to admit them because they don't want to catch a lawsuit from Stephen Miller. So the plan is working and will continue to work as long as we let these people hold power.
Right. And also, just very quickly, don't forget the lawsuit that Ed Blum filed against the Fearless Fund using the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And that was designed to scare off the corporations that were partnering with the African-American women that had the grant program for African-American for women-owned businesses. All this is connected. All this is connected, and it's detrimental for African-Americans.
It's a modern day Klan movement, and I do not say that hyperbolically. If you think about how the Klan used to operate, if you were a Black-owned business, the Klan would come and harass you. The Klan would come and make it dangerous for you. If you were a white business that hired an African American, the Klan would make sure that you paid a price for it. What Stephen Miller is doing is exactly like what the Klan is doing, only he is using lawsuits instead of burning crosses. That is the difference, is that he is using the power of the pen as opposed to the power of fire. But it's the same idea. It's to threaten and intimidate any employer who dares to hire a Black person, to put them on notice that their business and their livelihood could be taken away, again, not through insurance fraud and Fryer, but through a lawsuit that they cannot defend themselves from.
Right. Thank you.
Elie Mystal, thank you so much for everything that you continue to do. We'll continue to be watching, and please continue to keep us all updated. We appreciate you joining us tonight on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thank you so much for having me. Love being here.
All right. Peace out. And we will be right back with more Roland Martin Unfiltered right here on the Black Star Network.
We begin tonight with the people who are really running the country right now.
Now, Trump is often wrong and misleading about a lot of things, but especially about history.
Donald Trump falling in line with President Elon Musk.
In the wake of the unsettling news that MSNBC has canceled Joy Ann Reid's primetime show, The Readout, Roland Martin and the Black Star Network would like to extend an invitation to all of the fans of Joy Ann Reid's MSNBC show to join us every night to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming on the Black Star Network for news, discussion of the issues that matter to you, and the latest updates on the twice impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump and his unprecedented assault on democracy, as well as co-president Elon Musk's takeover of the federal government. The Black Star Network stands with Joy Ann Reid and all folks who understand the power of Black voices in media. We must come together and never forget that information is power. Be sure to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered weeknights, 6 p.m. Eastern at youtube.com/Roland S. Martin, or download the Black Star Network app.
This week on The Other Side of Change.
Environmental disaster and systemic exploitation.
From the wildfires in California to the unexpected snowstorms in the South.
We are in the climate collapse. These extreme weather events are becoming more disastrous, and it is Black and brown communities that are often hit first and worst.
Watch us on the Black Star Network, so tune in to The Other Side of Change.
Bruce Smith, creator and executive producer of The Proud Family, Louder and Prouder, and you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
The fight over diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools has taken a significant turn. The Trump administration has introduced a quote-unquote public portal where parents, teachers, and even students can report schools for what they consider quote-unquote illegal discriminatory practices related to race or sex. Wow. Today was the deadline for K-12 schools and universities to comply, with warnings that failure to eliminate DEI programs could lead to the loss of federal funding. Supporters of this initiative, such as Moms for Liberty, argue that the portal empowers parents to challenge what they describe as divisive ideologies in the classroom. However, critics, including major teachers unions and civil rights organizations, claim that this move serves as a tool to suppress discussions about race, gender, inequality in education. Legal challenges are already in progress. A federal judge in Maryland has blocked certain aspects of Trump's administration's DEI crackdown, and more lawsuits are anticipated. Let's bring it back to the panel now. We're also joined by Matt Manning, civil rights attorney. And I want to start with you, Matt. I mean, this is perfect timing. You're out of Corpus Christi, Texas. So I know in Texas, you've already been seeing things like this. But as this starts to get into this nationwide federal government policy, what are your thoughts on this right now?
Well, my first thought is I'm going to brag because I learned today that my son got into the best elementary school in the state of Texas today because he scored the 99th percentile. So shout out to my son. I'm very proud of him and his accomplishment. And if somebody wants to smoke, file a lawsuit and we'll beat it. But in any event, here's my thought on the policy. You know, this is very reminiscent to me of communist Russia, right? The tell on your neighbors type thing. And what's the problem with this is that one, you're going to have people who are emboldened to essentially tell on their neighbors and bring frivolous complaints, very similar to what you see in the reproductive space, right? That's what we've done in the state of Texas is we've literally weaponized the law such that you can file a lawsuit against a doctor or against a person who has been engaged in, abortion or promoting abortion outside of the state even. And this is very reminiscent of that and similar to that insofar as people will be emboldened to file complaints. And the reality of it is, you know, with the DEI thing, that's become another dog whistle for Black. We all know that, and we talk about it here on the show. But the issue with that is that there's going to be an inordinate number of complaints, most of which will have absolutely no basis in reality. And it's terrifying that the federal government is doing this, essentially promoting a crackdown on your neighbors and promoting this almost vigilante environment behind DEI. So it's concerning. But what I don't understand really is why you would promulgate this policy if your intent is to get rid of the entire Department of Education. It seems to me it's kind of inconsistent with what they've signaled in terms of their intentions with the Department of Education. So I'm not sure if that's just purely the chaos and the cruelty are the point, or if there's some longer strategic game that I'm unable to see. But those are my kind of initial thoughts.
No, I hear you. And Raven, in addition to your thoughts that I want to get from you shortly, I also want to know if you see a little bit of hypocrisy with this and the fact that Donald Trump just had a quote unquote Black History Month celebration at the White House just a week or two ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I actually posted something on my socials about that and how it's essentially, at least given to me, like, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. I don't know if I can curse on here, but that's the energy it was giving to me. Very much virtue signaling. And signifying or implying that he cares about the Black community while simultaneously cutting DEI, cutting programs, cutting funding that directly pours into and impacts our communities. So I think it's deeply problematic. I think it's deeply emblematic of who he is as an individual and where his values or lack thereof lie. And I definitely want to reiterate that this moment feels like McCarthyism 2.0, right? This turn on your neighbors and turn them in positionality that ties back to this moment of anti-communism, extreme anti-communism in this country. And I think there's a case to be made that there are parallels between this anti-communist moment and this anti-DEI moment, which, as my co-panelist named, is really just code for anti-Black. And so I think this is a moment where we're seeing the pendulum swing, right? We go in one direction and we make progress, and then there's always, unfortunately, at least thus far, this extreme white backlash. And we're very much in a moment of extreme white backlash, but it's so insidious because the backlash is happening simultaneously while they're telling us to our face that they care about us when they don't. They don't love us, they don't care about us, and they're reflecting that in their legislative decisions.
And Michael, given the work that you do with the African History Network show, is this something that we should have seen coming? I mean, should we have been prepared for the what some call the Black lash? And every time there's some type of progress made historically, there's always some type of effort to fight this in some way, shape, or form. Should we have been prepared for this?
Absolutely, we should have been prepared for this. And I've been warning people about Project 2025 since 2023, because it was released from the Heritage Foundation in April 2023. And I found out about the Schedule F employees from the article that Jonathan Swan wrote for Axios.com in July 2022 that dealt with reclassifying about 50,000 civil service employees, as Schedule F employees, and being able to fire them and replace them with people whose ideology aligns with Donald Trump's. This is what we're seeing going on right now with Doge and the purge that's taking place of people all across the federal government, the 2.3 million employees. We see this is going to be somewhere around 200,000 that are going to be eliminated very quickly here. When you talk about the Black History Month celebration and the Black MAGA that was there, that was a total disgrace. And Black MAGA saga didn't ask for an explanation of to my knowledge, of why Donald Trump is canceling DEI programs, why he rescinded the executive order from 1965, Executive Order 11246, which is affirmative action from President Johnson. And we saw this coming also if you, I did a video October 18th, 2024, when Donald Trump was on Fox and Friends. I'm not sure whose friends they are, maybe the Klan. But when he was on Fox and Friends and Brian Kilmeade asked him the question, what would you do if you have one of these woke states, one of these liberal states that teach this new history that America was built on the backs of slaves on stolen land? Donald Trump's response was, we won't send them any money. He was talking about not sending funds to schools, school districts, or states that teach actual history, declaring a war on history being taught accurately in schools. This is exactly what's taking place right now. Hashtag we tried to tell you. Should have voted for the black woman.
Yeah, got the different shirts. We can support that as well. Before we go to break, Matt, I want to come back to you as a civil rights attorney, because being here in the DMV, I remember Glenn Youngkin having a similar, basically a DEI snitch line. And as we've talked here multiple times, DEI, they talk woke, it's all about black. But how should other groups besides black people be receiving this? It seems like sometimes people just kind of let us go and basically look at us as some type of sacrificial lamb. But this is clearly something that's going to affect all different types of groups. But I don't know if there's a strong response coming from those communities. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, that's an interesting question. And I think if I had a little more time, I'd probably answer it more thoughtfully. But I'll tell you, any person who's a part of any marginalized group needs to think that they are soon coming for you as well. And, you know, you've already seen, I think, some echoes of that in the fact that a lot of these affirmative action lawsuits have at the elite universities have pitted, you know, non-white Asian people against white people. Right. So the idea is if you're a part of any kind of marginalized group, you need to be concerned right now, because right now the attack on us is the attack on all. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, this erosion as it relates to rights is not only on DEI, it's also in the LGBTQ community. And that's going to continue to expand. At least as it relates to the Latino community, it's primarily more in the context of immigration, but it's nonetheless the same type of erasure, erosion, and attack. And I think that's only going to be exacerbated the more that this administration is chaotic with its executive orders and isn't trying to expand this executive power. I think they're trying to find every realm of influence wherein they can say you are other and therefore you are less important and therefore you are, expendable. And I think that's what we're seeing in their early days of this administration.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. And right now we're accepting investors in our $17 million round to revolutionize the future of social media. Today, for just $399, you can own 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $6.65 a share. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. While the big platforms have grown too massive and disconnected from their users, Fanbase is building a platform where creators and users truly come first. We've already raised $4.8 million from everyday investors who believe in this vision, and now you can join them. This is your chance to invest in a social media tech company with over 1 million users that is disrupting media by allowing anyone to reach all of their following and monetize their content from day one. The market is changing, big platforms are failing to serve their users, and Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now. Invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the future of social media.